help me to welcome Professor Richard Yarde today.
These works that I'm going to show you start around the middle 90s, and it's when I had some serious health problems. And I want to speak to the idea of using the work as a positive approach. One of the positive approaches that I use to dealing with health issues. And I tried in this work to use it as one of the healing devices that I was working with at the time to try to hold myself together emotionally and physically. I had a dream in which I was, the visual image I remember in the dream is that I saw myself in two parts. In one part, I was sort of dressed normally. In one part, I had spaghetti sauce spilled all over me. So as I tried to interpret the dream, I interpreted when I was painting the notion of spaghetti sauce, I was painting the sense of fragmentation. And as I got ill, that's sort of what occurred. I got into a situation in which I was teaching one day and literally fell out in the classroom, and they had to rush me to the hospital. And so I went through that experience and thought I was over it, and then things got a lot worse. So I had these stroke-like symptoms, and in the process I lost feeling in my hands and to some degree the ability to speak. And the doctors, in a sense, gave up on me. My wife didn't give up on me, thank goodness. The doctors gave up on me, and a number of other people that I went to who were very supportive. There's a Catholic priest, Father Ralph D'Orio, who some of you may know of, who, one of the things, I was looking for solace, very much looking for solace, and I went to a service of his, and I think 5,000 people were at the service, so there was really, I thought there was no hope of him, connecting up with me at all. But as he passed down the aisles, he looked over, and he came over and touched my heart, and he said, the doctors cannot take hope away from you. It's something that you have, and you can hang on to that. And that was, I just burst into tears when he did that, because it was just like, he found this way of turning everything around. It turned out that we ended up having a relationship because he had, as a young man, wanted to be an artist. And as a young man, my mother had wanted me to be a minister. So we had this point where we could sort of speak to similar kinds of issues. Each one of us ended up on the other side of things. But he had actually he came to the university and took courses and received a degree in art, in painting, actually. So these slides, once they get this figured out, these slides will sort of track that experience and just give you some idea of how I was trying in the work to, first of all, just document the experience, and then secondly, trying to find a way to heal myself partially through the painting. And I had very much was involved in alternative approaches because the medical profession, as I said, had written me off, and I still wanted to live. And
this was how many years ago?
This started in, I think it was about 92, 93, sometime between 92, 93, and 95. And after the worst experience, they had my wife bring me home, and she put me to bed, and we had a Maine Coon cat at this time. And the Coon cat was very much my wife's cat, but at this point, the cat came in and looked at me. He got up on my chest, and for 3 days, he paced my heart. For 3 whole days. He never moved for 3 days. After that 3-day period, he shook himself off, got up and left. And then I was able to actually get up, and I made my first steps toward the bathroom, and then from the bathroom downstairs, and then from downstairs out to getting the mail, and then I started to just tried to hold myself together. I started to walk long distances. I was like this sort of shellless person at the time. Okay, so this was, in terms of the way that I work, I'm very, as Susan said, I'm very much interested in other cultures. And one of the cultures that really interests me is the Japanese culture. So I'm constantly looking for source material in other cultures, and I found this game, paper game, in which the image, when it was folded, was whole, and when it was unfolded, it was fragmented. And this is based on a kind of mythic fox shrine source of material. If you look carefully, you can see the fox in the open image holding a fan, kind of dancing around there. But for me, what this represents, and the after effect of what this represents, is a kind of split in my form, which took place later on in a more powerful way. This work was done, this is one of the first works I did after the illness. I stopped painting for about a year. And when I started back again, I thought, I'm going to go back to what is just the most primal thing that I've done. And I tried to think back to my childhood. What was it that I did? And I finger painted. Some of you probably have too. So I started doing these finger paintings, probably weeping all the time doing these finger paintings. And then as when I got finished, I would just set these handprints up. I thought, my hands felt like stone, felt like lead, felt like wood, and my body felt fragmented. So how do I speak to that issue? And so I had found this puppet form of the hand, and was using my head to suggest the fragmentation. Now these dots that you see also came in. Some of them represent the position of lines on the palm, and some of them just represent a kind of energy field that you see coming through in some of the other work. And this is a variation on the same theme. Is that in focus? How is that? Is it focused okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I was trying a similar theme with more intense color to see what kind of changes would take place, if any, in the work, in the body of the work. And then I started to access, I think the less mobile I was in terms of my physical attributes, the more active my inner world started to become. So I started paying a lot of attention to my dreams. And I was at the time working with a Jungian therapist, and I had this terrible dream of being beheaded. And I was incredibly upset. I went into the therapist and I said, I had this dream of being beheaded. Does it mean I'm going to die? She said, no, just the opposite. That's a new dream. It's all about new life. And so I had made this painting trying to suggest that experience, but trying to think of it in terms of new life. So the pattern that you see, the dot pattern, is based on an energy field, the transformation of energy in the sun. So I've obviously gone to science text to find that pattern. And then the pattern on my head below is a pattern of acupuncture points that I had lifted from a Tibetan text. So here I am trying to turn this dream around and make it into something positive. So of course the painting is called A New Beginning. And this is a work, again, using similar elements except for the mouth or the braces. And I was going through some problems at school and feeling somewhat attacked. And I was trying to sort of speak to that issue too, so the mouths represent these voices, negative voices coming at me. But again, I'm still working with the dots that represent the energy field. And this is one panel of a diptych. These works are 110 inches. The first work took me about 2 months to do. The second work, which I'll show you later, took me 5 days to do, both on the same scale. So I think I had sort of resolved some of the problems I was working with. This is based on an old Chinese acupuncture chart. So and this body of work is the first body of work where I'm trying to deal with issues of healing. So I'm trying to use these points on the body as healing. I hadn't experienced acupuncture at that time, but I was, again, fascinated by this. This is the pattern that goes with it. It's a diptych. And again, the same issues take place in both works. The same concerns take place in both works. And aside from the source, because I want to suggest to you how I'm thinking about images. Aside from the source that's related to the Chinese acupuncture, I have found a source in African work. These are figures from a shrine set up to honor Shango. Shango is the god of thunder, and lightning in the Yoruba cult, culture. So I'm trying to find different ways to deal with or to observe the use of dot pattern and the meaning behind it. Now, one of the things that I was exposed to during my illness was X-ray, where they were trying to find out what was going on with me, and so I was exposed to a lot of X-rays. And I thought, well, it was interesting. I'm going to explore this kind of format and see what comes of it. And one of the things I experienced is a sense of a relationship between all things. Is that the inside of the body seemed very much to me like the outside world. If you're looking at a map of an area, not necessarily a city area, but a map of a country area, and you're experiencing it from an aerial perspective, there's a very close relationship. And so I began to sort of see that, yes, all things are connected, all things are related. This is a section of the celiac, this is sort of the interior of the central body. But this is the first time I started to work with a really fluid sense of pattern, which I'm interested in exploring again. And this was a work also done close to the time when I first started to recover and begun to paint. And this is called the double spiral. And this is again a work based on a dream. And I just had this dream I didn't know the meaning of it. And I was trying to suggest the experience of that dream through this indication of what one critic called just a sense of things coming to a point where they're just sort of bursting. And I didn't know what I was doing in a sense. I was just trying to create the feeling that I had from the dream. And this work is related closely to my experience at Father Diorio's. There's something that's called laying on of hands. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but I was very skeptical when I went into the services. And I would see Father Diorio laying hands on people and see them falling out. And I thought, there's a lot of hysteria in this situation here. And then he got to me. And he laid hands on me, and I also fell out too, and felt this incredible feeling of peace, while I was out for a while after I'd gotten up. So I started to just do some images dealing with the palm. Dealing with the palm is a kind of healing device. So again, you see the repetition of this field of energy, which I'm trying to describe through the dots. And this is another work called Pulse, and it also, deals with some of the same issues. It mixes what I think of as a couple of different codes. One coming from Morse, which is at the top, and again one coming from this energy field, which is at the bottom. And then I had this dream that just disturbed me. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And in the dream, there were these floating doll hands, a woman laying face down, and just dots kind of floating around in space. I'm sorry for the condition of this slide, but this is from an exhibition at Smith College, 96 or something like that. This is a work called Mojo Hand, and I want to talk about it a little bit, just because it was a breakthrough work for me. One of the things you notice in my work is that I work with these little blocks that are called grid. And I work with these patterns, and these patterns I work with as though I'm just filling out the background of things. And then I come back later on and work with the imagery. So here I was doing research in the library. I was trying to find some kind of answer to the dots, and also some kind of answer to this woman lying on her back. And I came across the X-ray of a pregnant woman, where the child was sort of photographed in the torso. And then I came across, or I came up with the idea of wanting to interpret some things into Braille, because they were dots, but they were dots that had meaning to me. So I spent some time at the Perkins School for the Blind, and one of my mantras when I was sick was the 23rd Psalm. And so I had a relationship with a couple of people at the school, and they sent me a translation of the 23rd Psalm, which is here, many times which I recite, but I won't bore you with that. Most of you know I get very caught up in motion when I recite that. And then off to our left is an early model of a DNA molecule. And off to the left of that, dots, which I can't remember the source of. So I had called this work Mojo Hand. And in African American culture, mojo is something that's made in order for one to fulfill one's wishes. And usually it's made by a man wanting to get a woman to fall in love with him. So I was thinking, I'm making this mojo for myself as something I want to make as a device that will help me heal. So all of these disparate images to me are about healing: the X-ray, the palms, the psalm, and the DNA, all about coming together to create a situation that involves healing. This is probably the greatest breakthrough I've had in the painting in many years. And then since I became interested in coding and the palm and the Braille, I also became interested in Kirlian photography. I wanted to see, well, what's the range of possibility with the human hand in terms of how it can be read. So these are all images of the human palm print, fingerprint, but taken with Kirlian photography. And in some cases, like the one on the lower right, the image is taken where the person whose print is being taken is in the act, is in the act of trying to heal someone. So in that process, you see a kind of aura develop off the fingerprint. And so this whole range, this is very small work, this whole range of work is about that kind of thing. And this is a small work called Listening that I wanted to develop at some point into a larger work. But what you see is me trying to take fragments of my own body and trying to make a statement in relation to that. I felt that having had this experience with the doctors who didn't listen, and having had this experience with other people who did listen, that listening was a very crucial thing in relationship to health. That if someone isn't going to listen, you're trying to explain your experience to them, there's no way they can help you because they're somewhere else. So at some point, this work will come into being in a stronger way. Then at some point, I became interested in issues of chance, which I think led me to the idea of game. And that led me to the idea of using the dot pattern as game devices. Here I'm using dominoes, primarily dominoes, and I'm just setting the field of space up with different configurations of the dominoes. And in the smaller piece, I had as a source a Chinese farmer's game that was played during the cultivation of crops. So in that game, each of the images were symbols related to the crop development. But I used symbols that I thought were related to my issues. I was born in late October. I'm Scorpio. That's when the Scorpio comes in. And shell is just sort of, again, related to the idea of hearing and the idea of the sea and so on. So each image has a kind of symbolic value to it. Whoops. Sorry. So this is just a detail. This work also comes from, actually comes from a series of dreams. And I don't know how many of you keep your dreams, but one of the things I've found is that they're very hard to translate into imagery. I spent years trying to illustrate the dreams, and I never had any success. And then I decided that after writing them down and making sketches, I needed some kind of template to fit them into. And in this particular case, there was a game called Snakes and Ladders. And so I was using the template to help me position the forms that came out of the dream. These gourds, and actually it's a woman's nipple that represents some things that happened in the dream, and the snakes. And what you see is text taken from the game. It's a game of, I guess, sort of good and evil, kind of trying to figure out how to escape evil and get to good. And it's a game where the ladders are used for the purpose of escape. And I explained all this to my wife, and my wife said, well, where are the ladders? You know, how do we get out of this? How do you get out of this situation? But I felt that it gave me a way to depict what was happening in the dream, and also to suggest some sort of mystery, which I'm interested in too. Once I had recovered from my illness, I thought, this world is a very mysterious place, and what happens to one can be very mysterious, and I wanted to find some way to keep that in the work. Now, the show that I had at the Worcester Museum was called Wing Show, and I'm going to show you, actually, I'll show you a series of works from that show. I started to think about this show after 9/11, and all the work that I was seeing was an attempt to illustrate the disastrous effects of 9/11. And I thought, that is not what I want to do. I want to do something that deals with the idea of bringing people together and the idea of kind of communal healing. So I went into different cultures to look for formats, and I came away with the notion that there are two shapes that seem to be predominant, whether they're in American culture, whether they're European culture, Chinese culture, African American, African culture. These shapes seem to predominate. And so I made this decision, which in some ways kind of locked me in. I decided that each of the works would be 90 inches square. And each would have a circular form that was based on some kind of, some culture's notion of relatedness. And so the first form I went to was, came from the Chinese culture, came from the I Ching, and so I used that format, which is a circle, square within a circle. But I used a fragment of my own palm, and I also used a fragment of a palm that was called a stigmata, but a stigmata related to healing. And so some of, I'll show you detail of the palm prints. Some of the palm prints have this kind of circular pattern in them, which sort of marks off the area that is supposed to represent the stigmata in the hand. And then I'm still working with the Chinese culture. Again, I'm still reflecting on my own experiences of illness. And there was a chart called PMAM, in which the Chinese set up a 24-hour time frame to determine when it would be necessary to treat an organ. The Chinese have this notion of connection between the larger cosmos and the individual, the inner body and the large outer world. So I was also thinking about all this testing that I had, the X-rays, the, what do you call these things? Forgetting the name. What's some of the other tests?
MRI?
CAT scans, MRIs, thank you. Yeah, so I was trying to image each part of the body with one of these devices. And I had problems with the kidney, leading to kidney failure and dialysis, and so that was definitely one of the organs I wanted to deal with. But I actually wanted to deal with all the organs that I considered to be crucial. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's a palm print almost hidden above each of one of these, which again I'm going back to the earlier work and thinking of the palm as a kind of healing device. And this is just a detail of a section of X-ray of the kidney, and then a scan of the bladder with the time of day. Still in the Chinese culture, looking to the compass as a form, but using chromosomes as the primary element, and thinking in terms of a connection between my own and my ancestry, and trying to create those connections. And this is just a detail, so you can see. These things are symbols that come from metallurgy, and I can't remember exactly what each one means. Here you can see the quality of the watercolor, where I'm working with this sort of these patches, but at the same time I'm working with an approach called wet into wet, where I put the surface down very wet, and it dries, but as it dries, it maintains that sort of lush, what I think of as a lush quality of wetness. And this is a work called Pulse, in which for the first time I'm using collage. These things are so big that after I had worked for a year, I was unwilling to abandon them. So if I made a mistake, I would just cover it up. And I think you can see in the bottom fragment of the head where that's just laid over. And luckily for me, it fit into my process, because I'm working with these blocks, this grid-like pattern. So here I'm using using the same elements. I'm using the dot pattern that comes from the energy field. I'm using the palms, and I've gotten very interested in repetition. And someone saw the work and they said, "Well, did you use a stamp to make this?" And I said, "No, I did it by hand." I said, "Why would you bother to do it by hand? You could do it so quickly with a stamp." And I said, "Well, I'm interested in the ritual of this, of being involved in this repetition, and having it take me to a place where I can forget about everything else and just be involved with what I'm doing at the time." And I didn't quite understand that. But, and this is just a detail, so I'm shifting the value relationships, dark hand, white field, white hand, dark field. And then the portrait, again, with the energy field as a layer, trying to, again, think in terms of a kind of healing. You know. This is another shot of the space at the Worcester Museum. And then another piece, which this I had done after I went from dialysis and luckily had a transplant. And I was trying to think, how do I express what was happening there? And I had found a Hopi Indian diagram of their planting season. And in that diagram, there were the days of the year, and there were the solstice and the equinox. And so the center is what deals with that, and then the other images are turned into Braille on the outside. But the image that you see inside comes from part of the tissue of my body where they inserted the kidney. So in a sense, in terms of thinking that all things are connected, I'm trying to go from inside my body to outside, in a sense, into what one might think of as the cosmos, and create a kind of connection between the two.
Where you, Richard, where you don't do an underdrawing at all, can you talk a little bit about that? How do you keep your place?
Yeah, I found that when I was taught to work in school, I was taught to make a drawing and essentially fill it in. You made a drawing and you filled it in. And then I found that was very boring because there was no there's very little risk involved in doing something, working in that way. So I decided that I wanted to try to approach the work without making a drawing. That meant that a lot of works got thrown away, because a lot of works just didn't come through. But I needed the sense of this, I needed the sense of having the feeling that I didn't know exactly what was happening. And that sort of has kept me working in some ways. And here you see the Braille, I think up above, more so in the months there. You see the equinox. And this is my source for the Braille that was sent to me from the Kirlian school. And this is a work, I don't know where it came from in some ways. I don't know if you know the work of the German artist Joseph Beuys. And he had done a lot of work with bees, thinking about them as a kind of symbol for healing and transformation. And so I just, somehow I felt like this is something I wanted to work with. And this is called the Dance of the Bees. It's sort of really based on the work of someone who spent his whole life researching bees and their attempt to locate food. And he researched the nature of the movements. So in a very offhand way, I was interested in them and made this painting, which I like very much. It's one of my favorites. And there's just the details so you can see the nature of my hand at work. And so I'm working with almost a kind of dot-like pattern in some cases. And then just trying to follow the pattern of the shape of the bee in other cases. And just slight variation. Even in strict repetition, there's always variation. Right? And I found that to be a fascinating thing too. And there's another shot of the space installation. The piece in the center is called ring shout, and I'll sort of explain that later on what that's about. This is a work called Sound Altar for the Blind. It's a study, and I'm using, I don't know if you can sort of pick up on the shell again. I'm using the shell motif, and I'm using a ruler. And I've taken this from an aerial perspective of this Boubadour, which is in Java, I think. And so I'm very literally using the position of the forms there as a basis for my composition. So this is an aerial perspective, and this is the actual monument, which is kind of mind-boggling. This is kind of metaphor for reaching one's spiritual, the height of one's spiritual space. So as people walk, they ascend to the center. So it's a way of allowing people to connect with their spiritual center. And so the ring shout was a ceremony that, in some ways, the circularity of it came out of Africa, but it was practiced in the South during slavery. And so there was a kind of circular movement that went on, but there were restrictions. People felt that because there was sound in this, people weren't allowed to use drums, because people, I think the plantation owners probably felt that drums were a way of signaling. So they forbade the use of drums, and forbade the use of people lifting their feet off the floor. So there are all these restrictions that people are working with. These ceremonies sometimes will go on for hours and hours. And if I can see well enough, I just wanted to read from, I don't know if I can see well enough. I'm going to read this to you later after the lecture. But the people who had experience watching this performance, some historians feel that it's kind of central to African American culture and art. This is the same performance taking place outside. And this is a work called Crossroads. I have to wait a little bit on this. Again, I'm just trying to accumulate all the images, some of which you've seen before, bring them all together into one work. And deal with this idea of change in terms of my own head. It's called Crossroads Blues, which is kind of based on a blues by, yes, Robert Johnson. And again, I'm just finding some ways to try to suggest what I got from that work. So I think in each of the cardinal points there is a repetition, a phrase that repeats the Crossroads Blues and translated into Braille. And it's just a detail. And here you can see the collage coming in. Mistake was made. And this is my source here. Again, this is this comes from the Caribbean. Although it was made in New York, the sources come from the Caribbean culture. Santeria and other religious elements are suggested here. And this is all about divination. It's all about finding or predicting for people their future through divination. Here it is. This is the major piece in relationship to this body of work. That I'm trying to use this to represent, I think, both my own interior feelings and this sense of ceremony. But I tried to do it in a somewhat symbolic way. So what I want you to notice here is just a sort of repetition of men's and women's feet and the mouths. Over the mouths there are this braille that represents life. Birth, life, death, and rebirth. And I want to show you my source after I show you the details here. This is just to give you a sense of how I'm working with the grid and with what has come to be a sort of seriated edge that I try to stress. So here the dots are representing one of those states. I don't know exactly which one here, I can't remember. So this was my source of inspiration. This is a tray used by the Yoruba called an Ifa Opan. And this tray is used by a diviner to try to help people when they're in trouble, sort of try to help them explain their situation or see into the future. So the main activity takes place in this central space. And here you can see, it's upside, no, it's okay. So the opening of the tray starts with the marking of crossroads. So you go from 1 to 2, and then from 3 to 4. And then these other directions represent these other patterns, which I can't translate for you, but they move the supplicant towards some kind of answer. And this is a diviner, it's called a Babalawo in this culture, who is marking the crossroads with his tapper. So you see this all is coming from a kind of active involvement with trying to use these devices to help. And this is a central piece to the work. And in the central piece, there's a sculptural representation of the ring shout. The braille on the outside represents Robert Johnson's Crossroads Blues. So it's Crossroads Blues in braille, just repeated many times. The scrim itself, I got the idea for the scrim from a ceremony, which is also a Yoruba, a ceremony which is called a gungun, which is practiced every year or once every 2 years. And with the gungun, a dancer is veiled with cloth. There are usually 2 layers of cloth, which is what I wanted, but couldn't afford to do it. 1 layer of old cloth, 1 layer of new cloth. And as the dancer is moving, the cloth underneath is exposed. And so the old and the new come together. And this is done to the accompaniment of music and song and so on. And so it's an attempt to sort of make contact with the ancestors. which I think in my own way I was trying to do here. And this is also the shrine. This is a shrine for Shango. Also was a source. This is a photograph of this up in the studio, and it was a source for the dot pattern that's in previous work. And I also had this up in the studio just as a shrine, also to Obatala, and I'll have to tell you later who Obatala is in relationship to the cosmology. But again, the sense of the gauze and consonantic enclosure is what I wanted to work with. And this is just a close-up of the sculpture. And one of the people asked, why is it that there's several pairs of shoes that are turned in opposite direction? Anybody have an idea? And I said, well, when these people were performing the ring shot, some of them were struck by the spirit and broke rank, so to speak. So you could sort of tell that the spirit was upon them by the fact that they had broken rank from the, from the kind of consistent rhythm that everybody else was keeping. And I should have mentioned, I made this decision to go with, let me go back up just quickly. I made this decision to go with a very limited palette of indigo and white. And I gathered that, we had spent some time, my wife and I, in Ibadan in Nigeria, and I became very fascinated with the dairy cloth, which is essentially made from the indigo. So I was in some ways trying to make a historical connection with the use of the color between that older culture and the present in terms of what I was doing. Almost over. Now, one of the things I hadn't done in many years was work with color. For whatever reason, the illness, I didn't feel like I could express what I wanted to working with color. And so my goals now have to do with working with color. And this is one of the first pieces I had done called, again, it's based on the blues called Coming and Going, or the Walking Blues. And it's also dream-based. So I was trying to suggest the different states that I had been in over time by showing my head in slightly different expressions on the head, and some heads with an overlay of dots, again representing acupressure points along the head. And in some cases, dots representing overlay of the palm, and in some cases, which you can see if you can remember back to the earliest work, or one of the earliest works I showed. They surround this cluster here. But I had this dream of shoes and my own head sort of framed in a box. And I had no idea what that meant. And so in these works, the meaning of the work comes much later. I'm kind of working in the dark, so to speak, initially, and then getting a sense much later. So this was a study for another attempt at this same kind of thing, trying to delve more deeply into portraiture, trying to get more out of the portraiture. And this is a work that I had made on dialysis called Cooked and Raw. I was trying to, I don't know if anybody's, I hope no one here has had the experience of dialysis, but one of the things that happens to you is that you just don't want to eat everything. Food is repulsive, and you experience these abdominal pains. And so I was trying to suggest symbolically through the hooks and some of these other elements that sense, through the funnel, the sense of the kind of machine that I was on. And then this is the beginning of a new body of work. And I'm trying to do a body of work that deals with issues coming from African American folktales. So the animal has now become important. I mean, it was coming through in some of the other work, but now it's becoming a major element for me. So this is a work called The Houses of Brer Rabbits, and it's based on an old folktale. I'm mixing different things because I'm trying to put a certain kind of flexibility. So I had taken this from Pooh, and I can read it. It says, go to 26 to give something, give someone medicine. So I'm trying to, again, I'm trying to sort of subtly weave that in. It's just a detail of the same piece. You get a sense of, how it's made in terms of the feel of the watercolor. And then this is another work. Again, I'm bringing the snake back that I had used earlier, and the shell back and the house back, but just trying to set it in a different disposition and set it within a different palette in terms of color. And this is the final work I'm going to show you. This is a reworking of the earlier Kismet piece, with the ladders included. So there's room for escape up here. And then in this particular, again, basing this on a game, Snakes and Ladders game. But in this case, it's a numerical, there's a range of numerical numbers going from 1 to 100. And so the Braille just speaks to that. And that's just a detail. So that's pretty much the end of things. I always like to end my lectures with a quote from Franz Klein, who was one of the abstract expressionists. And what he said, which always stuck with me, is, it's not about knowing, it's about giving. Thank you.